I'm wearing my Captain America shirt today out of solidarity for Brenna. Where's the heck did she go? There you are in the back there. So just out of solidarity, like I said, but also because it fits. For those of you who weren't here last week, Brenna was talking about the kind of transfer of authority and blessing after at the end of Moses' life, and when Joshua took over and started to do everything that we see in the book of Joshua. And we've been studying, like Art and I have been studying, we have a Bible study on this, and I love this story. I love the story of Joshua. But I said to him, it's very bittersweet, because Moses has died, and then Joshua gives them about 3 days to get ready, and then they march into the promised land. They go in faith and in power, and they march into this bountiful land of milk and honey, and they conquer the land. They do these great things in faith, and it's fantastic, except for that they forget just a couple of things. They don't quite push out all the people who need to be pushed out, and they're not 100% faithful in what they needed to do and what God has commanded them to do. And so those people are left as a thorn in their side and as a temptation for them. And God says he's going to leave them there as a test for them. And the people fail that test over and over again. And the story of them failing over and over again is called Judges. It's the book of Judges. And that's where we're going to get into today. There's a Facebook post that a friend of mine put on a little while ago, and he's a former Marine, so if that tells you anything. But it's and I'm not going to show you the picture. I'm not going to have it up on the slide or anything, because it's some of the iterations of this are kind of political. But it's, tough times or hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. It's not a perfect slogan, right? I mean, you can see some of the kind of logic errors, and it's not perfect, but there's a certain amount of truth to that, right? About people who grow up in hard times have a resolve and have a toughness about them that they use, and they tend to do better in a lot of situations. And we see a similar cycle to that. But we've got the added benefit, being in the Bible, there's a spiritual element to this that we see. And in Judges, we see this a lot. And it comes in this form. There's a quote that always comes up in Judges, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of. And in this case, we're gonna look at the Midianites, because the Midianites are the people who oppose Gideon. So in chapter 6, we see that. And the theme for this week is going to be uncertainty, or faith-filled uncertainty. And the attribute of God we're going to look at is mercy, because these two things go hand in hand. And I want to thank Rebecca again for kind of putting together this series and bringing this to us, because I think this is a good one. So we're going to look at, like I said, the Israelites had done evil in the sight of the Lord. They've gone after Baal, and they've created idols, and they've built Asherah poles and everything. One of them is actually in Gideon's father's house, or on his property. I mean, I don't think it was in the actual house, but so they've gone to worshiping other gods and done the things they're not supposed to do. So now they've been given into the hand of the Midianites, and this is appropriate because the Midianites were a nomadic people. And they would wait until the Israelites had some crops or something of value, and they would sweep through, the Bible says, like locusts, and just tear things up, take everything they had, and run off. So when we find Gideon in chapter 6, he's beating a wine press. He's beating wheat in a wine press. Normally, for those of you who don't know, wheat is typically crushed out or whatever, but it's typically laid out somewhere. Hopefully you have an animal to kind of drag a stone or a heavy piece of wood to kind of separate it off from the chaff, which is very light, and then you either have a winnowing fork or something that throws that up into the air. The chaff is blown off, and then you have just the heavy kernels there, which you can, of course, make bread and whatever else you need. Gideon didn't have any of that. He didn't have an animal to do that for him, and he was hiding in a wine press where there's no airflow, so it would have been very tedious, but he's afraid the Midianites were going to come sweeping through and take what he had, which was probably pretty sparse. So he's stuck. And it's at that point we find him here. So these were uncertain times. And uncertain times create uncertain people. And that's the byproduct of sin. But here we have Gideon. And then in chapter 6, if you want to stand for this, I'm going to read from chapter 6, verses 12 through the first part of 22. It's up to you guys. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." And Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened to us? And where are all the wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hands of Midian." And the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do I not send you?" And he said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." And the Lord said to him, "But I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." And he said to him, "If I have now found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you." And he said, "I will stay till you return." So Gideon went into his house and prepared a young goat and unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and the broth he put in a pot, and he brought them to him under the terebinth and presented them. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on this rock, and pour the broth over them." And he did so. And the angel of the Lord reached out and touched the tip of his staff, which was in his hand. He touched the meat and the unleavened cakes, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. And then Gideon perceived that he was with the angel of the Lord. And that's all for that. You guys can be seated if you want. Now notice the excuses and how he says, why has this happened? And where are all of his wonderful deeds, right? And I'm the least of my father's clan, and Manasseh was not the most powerful tribe. Notice also how the angel of the Lord, in the first act of mercy we'll see in this, glosses over that. He doesn't bring up that they're in this position because of their sin, and he also doesn't bring up the idols and the Asherah pole that's on his father's property. He just kind of glosses over that and says, "Do I not send you?" Because when God decrees something, it's already done. So the first adventure on which God sends Gideon lines up with the first commandment, and it's no coincidence. God does not like other gods before him. He wants the idol and the Asherah pole on Gideon's father's land gone, and because God likes poetic justice, Gideon is to sacrifice the bull on a fire made from that Asherah pole. He's to cut it down, chop it up, and sacrifice kind of a sin offering on this altar using that wood from the Asherah pole. Now, the Bible makes a point of saying that he did the deed at night because he was afraid, but the angel comes to him at night. Again, because Gideon's uncertainty is mercifully being taken into account. Now, the people have developed an affinity for these idols. That's part of the reason they got in this situation, but Gideon's dad backs him up, and he gets away clean. After this, people flock to him, but Gideon gets nervous again before the big fight, because now it's on. Now he's got a group of people, and they're going to go strike the Midianites. And he asks the Lord for some very specific proofs. Wet fleece on dry ground with no dew the one morning, and dry fleece on dew-soaked ground the next morning, which is, these things are unnatural, and so these requests make sense from a standpoint of that wouldn't happen without God, right? But it could be taken as a testing the Lord, which we find out later is just not really something we're supposed to do. But again, God's mercy and his patience shines through, and he allows that. And Gideon is able to kind of work through some of these things. What follows is a story that many of us know. God whittles down the army to a mere 300 men and provides a final assurance of victory by showing him a dream in which a frightened Midianite member of the army sees Gideon in this dream striking down the whole army in a way, symbolically, even though he's outnumbered more than 100 to 1. But God makes that dream come true. And this becomes a turning point for Gideon and for the nation of Israel. The Midianite army is decimated and on the run, and they're hunting down their kings and their princes. And while mopping up, he actually now starts to show a great deal of confidence from this point forward. And from here on out, he immediately reacts when he's challenged or confronted, or when people are doubting him. And he is able to kind of deal with that. He's even bold enough to threaten those people who don't support him and to return to make good on those threats. And if you haven't read that part of the story, it's kind of a fascinating story. But the confidence, though, then becomes a problem later in his life. Because if you look kind of at the latter part of chapter 9, he says he has many wives and 70 sons, one of whom is by a concubine, and let's just say the people fall away again at the end of his life. Now, there are a lot of reasons why this part of the Bible gets a lot of coverage, but for our purposes, the point is God's mercy. God hears the cry of his people. God comes to Gideon on his own accord. He saves the people through and indeed in spite of Gideon, and God continues to save to this day. We should be encouraged by these chapters, at least to a point. I don't want to overplay the similarities, right, between 2020 and living in fear of a marauding horde of Midianites, but I think it's fairly. I think it's correct to say that we live in uncertain times. There are a lot of uncertain people out there. You can just see it, on the news. You can see it just walking around and talking to people. And I think many times I think we can all agree, many times we've lost our way. And we don't even sometimes know how we've offended a perfect and holy God and have a need for his mercy. But we have a God who is willing to be with us and willing to show us mercy and be with us in those hardships. And I suppose I could leave it at that, right? I could pat everybody on the back and say, hey, it's all about God's mercy, and that wouldn't be wrong. But I want to take a look at that passage again, because in all this, there's only one thing that Gideon does without being kind of prodded along, and I think that's significant. In biblical times, traveling was arduous and dangerous, and as we've recently discussed, it wasn't so long ago that the Hebrews were sojourners themselves. So when a traveler came to one of them, they were actually commanded, it was part of the law, that they were to be treated with the utmost hospitality, because they were recently travelers wandering in the desert themselves. So when this angel of the Lord, he's referred to as, or the Lord, comes to Gideon, it's possible that Gideon thought he was just a traveler, but I kind of don't think so. A random passerby wouldn't be allowed to call someone who was hiding in a wine press a mighty man of valor, and certainly wouldn't be allowed to tell this person he was going to save his country from his worst enemy, at least without being challenged. If someone came up to you and said, hey, mighty warrior, you're going to save the world from ISIS, I'd be weirded out. And that person wouldn't be asked for a sign. But no, Gideon knew something was going on. And the only thing he could do when he was faced before this representative of God, or possibly God himself, because some people think that this is the pre-incarnate Christ speaking to him. The only thing you can do at that point is offer what little he had. Now, he didn't have a lot. Again, the Midianites, this was what they did. They came through and they took everything. That's why he's hiding. That's why he's trying to hoard what little food he has and keep it a secret. But he still makes this offering for God, and it's confirmed that he's God when, instead of eating this like a hungry traveler would do, this messenger before him touches his staff to that rock and consumes it with this fire that just kind of comes out of nowhere. So he's aware now, certainly if he wasn't before, that there was something big going on. So there's 3 points, at least, that I took from this, and then we'll close. 1, sin breeds uncertainty and death, and God's mercy and the acceptance of that mercy brings confidence in life. The second point is that we have to give what we have. Part of accepting God's mercy and his grace is laying down what we have, knowing that what he has is greater. And finally, our lives are his, and his stuff is ours, and our work is his. We have to lay that all down. And the last point is that if we call ourselves by his name, we're called to make a difference for him. And this was best said in a sermon that I saw while I was doing some research, and I don't have the gentleman's name with me because I forgot to get it, and then I couldn't find it when I came back. But he said, he's convinced that we've told ourselves that we're only people who are true servants of God are people who are confident and witty and self-assured and powerful, and they come here and they're ready to just tear down hell for Christ, right? But it's not always that way. A lot of times, and this is a good example, Gideon is a good example of people who are small and weak and not confident, and they can be transformed into mighty men of God. And I think that's encouraging for us because some of us weren't the most confident people even before 2020. And when this year came and kind of messed all sorts of stuff up, this is a good vision of hope and mercy. And all we have to do is kind of accept that mercy from God and be about the business of following Him. So I guess with that, we'll close in prayer. And I'll say, Lord, thank you for bringing us this word today. And I certainly hope that I've brought home some of your truth. Thank you for this group, and thank you for all the blessings that you've given us. Lord, you've seen us through some very interesting times and some very uncertain times. We ask that you would give us the mercy and give us the strength to praise you and to do your will. Lord, no matter how hard it might be or how confusing it might be, in Jesus' name, amen.